I fired 3 executives before lunch, just another Tuesday at Hall Enterprises, where I'd spent the last decade turning my father's struggling company into an Anaheim powerhouse. The boardroom still smelled of expensive cologne and fear when my assistant knocked. "The Harrison acquisition papers need your signature, mess hall." I took the folder without looking up. "Tell legal I want the non-compete ironclad. Last time they left a loophole you could drive a truck through." The glass walls of my corner office framed the Anaheim skyline, a kingdom I'd conquered one hostile takeover at a time. At 38, I had everything: the penthouse, the fortune, the power. Everything except someone to go home to. My phone buzzed. Another crisis, another fire to extinguish. I smoothed my tailored suit, fingers brushing the sapphire pendant that matched my eyes. "Your power piece," Dad had called it when he'd given it to me on my first day as CEO. "I need the jet ready in an hour," I told my assistant. "I'll handle the San Francisco meeting personally." 3 hours later, my Porsche SUV hugged the curves of the Pacific Coast Highway. The quarterly numbers looked exceptional. Another record-breaking projection. I permitted myself a small smile. The board couldn't question my methods now. Then I heard the pop. "Damn it," I muttered as the steering wheel jerked. Perfect. A flat tire on a scenic stretch with no cell service. I pulled onto a viewpoint overlooking the ocean, got out and assessed the damage. The front tire was completely blown. I opened my trunk, staring at the spare tire and jack like they were alien artifacts. How hard could this be? I was Claire Hall. I ran a billion-dollar corporation. Surely I could change a tire. 20 minutes later, I was sweating through my silk blouse, my blonde hair falling from its perfect chignon, when a beat-up Jeep pulled behind me. "Need a hand?" The voice belonged to a redhead with freckles scattered across her nose. She wore faded jeans and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking like she'd wandered out of a completely different world than mine. "I have roadside assistance," I replied coldly, though we both knew that was useless without cell service. She raised an eyebrow, taking in my dirt-smudged Louboutins and the jack I'd clearly been using incorrectly. "Looks like it's working great." Despite myself, I flushed. The woman approached, crouching beside the tire. Her green eyes assessed the situation quickly, hands moving with practiced ease. "I'm Lindsay," she offered, loosening the lug nuts. "Lindsay Washington." "Claire Hall," I replied stiffly. "Fancy car? Fancy name." She smiled, a genuine thing that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Where you headed in such a rush?" "San Francisco. Business." "Always business, huh?" She worked efficiently, her movements fluid and certain. I watched her hands, calloused, capable, so different from the manicured executives I dealt with daily. There was something refreshing about her directness. Teaching conference in San Diego, she volunteered without being asked. Well, was. Now I'm just driving. Something in her voice shifted, a shadow crossing her face, trying to figure some things out. When she finally stood, wiping her hands on her jeans, I noticed a dusting of dirt on her cheek. Without thinking, I reached out to brush it away. Our eyes met, and something unexpected flickered between us, a spark that made me pull my hand back too quickly. "You're all set," Lindsay said, her voice slightly huskier than before. "But that spare won't get you to San Francisco. There's a garage in the next town over." I nodded, suddenly aware of how close we were standing. "Thank you. I appreciate the help." "No problem." She turned to leave, then hesitated. "Actually, that tire doesn't look great. Mind if I follow you to the garage, just to make sure you make it?" I should have declined. I had meetings, calls, an empire to run. But something about the way the sun caught her red hair made me pause. "If you insist," I said, trying to sound indifferent. I didn't know then that this chance encounter on a coastal highway would change everything, that the woman standing before me, with engine grease on her hands and compassion in her eyes, would make me question every choice I'd ever made. 2 days? I stared at the mechanic in disbelief. "You can't possibly need 2 days to replace a tire." "Not just the tire, ma'am. Your axle took damage. Parts gotta come from Los Angeles." He shrugged, immune to my glare. "Nothing I can do." I gripped my phone, scrolling through emails already piling up. The San Francisco meeting couldn't wait. Lindsay leaned against the garage wall, watching me with amusement. "Problems in paradise?" she asked. "I need to get to San Francisco, today." I punched numbers into my phone, trying to arrange alternate transportation, but nothing was available on short notice. Lindsay pushed herself off the wall. "I'm heading north. Could drop you in San Francisco." I looked at her. then at her ancient Jeep. The choice between missing critical meetings and spending hours in that rust bucket with a stranger made my stomach twist. "Fine," I said finally, "but we leave now." To my surprise, Lindsay was a decent driver and an unexpectedly comfortable companion. She didn't feel the need to fill silence with chatter like most people, and when she did speak, she was thoughtful. "What's so important in San Francisco?" she asked as we wound along coastal roads. "Acquisition meeting. If I'm not there, months of work could unravel." "Sounds stressful." I laughed shortly. "That's business. Is it worth it?" Her question caught me off guard. No one had asked me that in years. Before I could answer, the sky darkened dramatically. Fat raindrops splattered the windshield, turning quickly to a torrential downpour. "Summer storm," Lindsay said, slowing the Jeep. "Might need to stop if it gets worse." 20 minutes later, we pulled into a small coastal town as lightning cracked overhead. The rain was coming down in sheets and flash flood warnings blared from the radio. "We should find somewhere to stay," Lindsay suggested. "Roads might wash out." I wanted to argue but knew she was right. We found a quaint bed and breakfast, Victorian style with gingerbread trim and a wraparound porch. "Sorry, just one room left," the elderly proprietor told us when we rushed in, dripping on her polished floors. "Got the king suite though, plenty of room for you two." Lindsay looked at me with raised eyebrows. I nodded curtly. "We'll take it." The room was charming in an old-fashioned way. Four-poster bed, antique furniture, bay windows overlooking the stormy ocean. I immediately claimed the bathroom to change out of my wet clothes. When I emerged, Lindsay was standing by the window, her profile illuminated by lightning flashes. Something about her stillness made my breath catch. "Only one restaurant open in town," she said without turning. "Hungry?" The restaurant was a small seafood place with candles on each table. In the warm light, I noticed how the green of Lindsay's eyes shifted like sea glass. When she smiled at the waitress, a dimple appeared in her left cheek. "So, Claire Hall," she said, sipping local wine. "Always been all business?" Since I was old enough to understand what my father built, I surprised myself by adding, "Wasn't much room for anything else." Lindsay nodded, studying me. "And now?" "Now I run the company. We're more successful than ever." "That's not what I asked." I blinked, unused to being challenged. "What about you?" "Teaching must be rewarding." It was. Her expression clouded. "I left my job after my mom died last month." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "She wasn't my birth mother. Found out at the funeral." Lindsay twisted her napkin, adoption papers in her safety deposit box. "That must have been shocking." It explained things, why I never quite fit. Lindsay's gaze met mine. "Now I'm trying to find my real parents. Or at least understand where I come from." The vulnerability in her admission stirred something in me. "My father always said, knowing your roots makes you stronger." "Is that why you're so driven? Strong roots?" I laughed bitterly. "More like expectations." The conversation flowed more easily after that. By dessert, I told her things I rarely shared, about boarding schools, about fighting to be taken seriously in boardrooms full of men, about the loneliness at the top. As we walked back to the B&B under clearing skies, our shoulders brushed. Lindsay stopped suddenly, turning to face me. "You're not what I expected, Claire Hall." "What did you expect?" "Someone colder." Her eyes dropped to my lips briefly before she stepped back. "We should get some sleep. Big day tomorrow." That night, lying awake with Lindsay breathing softly on the other side of the king bed, I wondered what my life might have been like. With more moments like this, simple conversations, unexpected connections, the strange comfort of a near stranger who somehow saw past my carefully constructed walls. My car wouldn't be ready for 3 more days. Some parts issue the mechanic had explained with excessive technical detail that I suspected was designed to prevent argument. I paced the small hotel room, firing off emails and making calls. Lindsay watched from the armchair by the window. "Your assistant sounds terrified of you," she remarked after my 3rd call. "Respect, not fear," I corrected, though even I didn't believe it. Lindsay stretched, her t-shirt riding up to reveal a sliver of freckled skin. "So what now, CEO Claire? 3 days to kill in a small coastal town?" I hesitated. The rational choice was to rent another car and continue to San Francisco. But something made me pause. the same inexplicable pull that had me agreeing to ride with her in the first place. I suppose I could work remotely for a few days. Lindsay's smile was worth the compromise. Road trip continues then? We left an hour later, her Jeep pointed north but taking the scenic route. Lindsay drove with one hand casually on the wheel, the other arm resting on the open window. The wind tousled her red hair, and occasionally she'd glance my way with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Why'd you agree to keep going with me?" she asked suddenly. "Efficient use of resources," I answered automatically. She laughed, a full, genuine sound that made me realize how rarely I heard real laughter anymore. "You're something else, Claire Hall." Midday, Lindsay veered off suddenly onto a dirt road. "What are you doing? This isn't the way to—" "Detour," she interrupted. "Trust me." The road wound through dense forest before ending at a small clearing. Lindsay hopped out, grabbing a backpack from behind her seat. 20-minute hike. Worth it, I promise. I stared at my designer heels. I'm not exactly dressed for hiking. She rummaged in her bag and pulled out a pair of sneakers. Always keep spares. Might be a bit big, but better than those torture devices. The shoes were indeed a size too large, but strangely comfortable as we followed a narrow trail through sunlit woods. I kept checking my phone, no signal. "World will survive without you for an hour," Lindsay teased. I was about to protest when we emerged into a clearing and I stopped short. Before us was a waterfall cascading into a crystal-clear pool, surrounded by moss-covered rocks and wildflowers. "How did you know this was here?" I asked, genuine wonder in my voice. "Local at the diner mentioned it. Said not many tourists find it." The water sparkled invitingly in the afternoon sun. Lindsay was already kicking off her shoes. "You're not serious," I said, as she peeled off her outer layers down to her underwear. "Dead serious." She stood there in simple cotton underwear, all long limbs and confidence, freckles dotting her shoulders. "Come on, Miss Corporate, live a little." I should have refused. Instead, I found myself carefully folding my clothes on a rock and stepping cautiously into the water in my matching silk bra and panties. The cold was shocking at first, but exhilarating. Lindsay dove under, emerging with water streaming down her face, laughing. Something inside me shifted. I dove too. We splashed and swam like children. When Lindsay flicked water at my face, I retaliated. Soon we were engaged in a full water fight, my laughter echoing off the rocks. I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed like that, full-bodied and free. Later, we lay on sun-warmed rocks, letting the afternoon heat dry us. I should have been checking emails, making calls. Instead, I watched clouds drift overhead. "Why do you push yourself so hard?" Lindsay asked softly. The question hung between us. In this place, with this woman I barely knew, truth came easier than it ever had. My father sent me to boarding school when I was 8. Said it would toughen me up for business. I traced patterns on the rock beneath me. Every holiday, instead of family time, he'd quiz me on quarterly reports. I learned early that love was conditional on performance. Lindsay turned to face me, her expression soft. "That's a heavy lesson for a kid." "It worked, didn't it? I run one of the most successful companies in California." "At what cost?" The question lingered as dusk approached. We built a small fire, and Lindsay produced marshmallows from her seemingly bottomless backpack. As stars appeared overhead, I found myself telling her about the loneliness of corner offices, about approval that never came, about relationships sacrificed for quarterly gains. She listened without judgment, her eyes reflecting firelight. "Your turn," I said finally. "What drives Lindsay Washington?" "Connection," she answered without hesitation. "Finding where I belong." Her hand found mine in the darkness between us, fingers intertwining naturally. I didn't pull away. In the fire's dying light, with the waterfall's distant music, something was happening, something that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. "Mez Hall?" The Henderson numbers looked concerning. I blinked, suddenly aware that my CFO was waiting for a response. The boardroom fell silent, all eyes on me. I cleared my throat, scanning the report in front of me. "Run the projections again with adjusted interest rates," I said firmly, covering my momentary lapse. "And schedule a call with their finance team this afternoon." As the meeting continued, my mind drifted again. Not to acquisition strategies or market forecasts, but to the memory of Lindsay's laugh echoing across mountain water, the way sunlight had caught her hair as she'd emerged from the waterfall. 3 days had passed since we'd parted ways. She continuing her journey of self-discovery, me returning to my corporate throne. Yet I couldn't focus. Later, in my office, my assistant knocked tentatively. "Your 2 p.m. canceled, and this came for you." She handed me a postcard, a simple landscape shot of autumn trees along a mountain highway. On the back, in casual scrawl, "Found this view and thought of you. Still looking for my roots. Hope you're terrorizing the corporate world. L. No return address." Just a tangible reminder that the past week hadn't been a dream. My phone rang. I answered automatically. "Claire Hall." "You always answer like you're announcing yourself to the world." Lindsay's voice sent an unexpected warmth through me. "How did you get this number?" "Your assistant took pity on me. Said you've been distracted lately." I made a mental note to speak with my assistant about boundaries, even as I smiled despite myself. "Where are you?" "About 3 hours north. Found a small town with amazing hiking trails through fall foliage. The colors..." She paused. "You should see it." The invitation hung in the air. I glanced at my calendar. Meetings, calls, deadlines. "I have commitments," I said, the words hollow even to my own ears. "Right." Her disappointment was palpable. "Well, just wanted to say hi." After we hung up, I sat staring at the phone. What was happening to me? 1 week ago, I would have dismissed any personal call during business hours without a second thought. 2 days later, I found myself driving north, telling myself it was just coincidence that my route matched the postmark on Lindsay's card. I'd fabricated a site visit to a potential acquisition target, something I would normally delegate. The mountain roads were ablaze with autumn colors, deep reds, burnt oranges, golden yellows. I found the small town easily enough, its main street lined with quaint shops and cafes. And there, emerging from a hiking supply store, was Lindsay. She spotted me before I could pretend this was all coincidence. Her face lit up with a smile that made my careful justifications crumble. "Claire Hall," she said, approaching my car. "Did you get lost on the way to a board meeting?" I stepped out, suddenly aware of how out of place my tailored suit looked among the casual hikers and tourists. "I was in the area. Business." "Sure you were." Her eyes danced with amusement. "Want the real tour?" Hours later, we hiked along a ridgeline trail, autumn leaves crunching beneath our feet. Lindsay had convinced me to change into borrowed clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt that smelled faintly of her lavender soap. "You look different," she commented as we paused to admire the valley below, trees creating a patchwork of fall colors. "Less intimidating without the power suit? More like yourself." We continued along the trail, our hands occasionally brushing. Each contact sent a ripple of awareness through me. When our fingers finally interlaced, it felt both terrifying and inevitable. "I've been thinking about you," Lindsay admitted as we reached a scenic overlook. "Too much, probably." I studied our joined hands. "I received your postcard." "And you drove 3 hours because of it?" "I told you. Business trip." She laughed, squeezing my hand. "Right. Very important business." The late afternoon sun cast everything in golden light. Lindsay's hair caught fire in the fading rays, her freckles more pronounced against her flushed skin. We returned to town as dusk fell, neither of us acknowledging what was happening between us. Lindsay suggested dinner at a local winery, and I agreed too quickly. The wine was local, robust and earthy. We shared a bottle, then another. Under the warm lights of the rustic restaurant, with jazz playing softly in the background, barriers fell away. I told her about deals gone wrong, about moments of doubt hidden beneath confidence. She shared stories of students who'd touched her heart, of the confusion following her adoptive mother's death. To unexpected detours, Lindsay toasted, her green eyes holding mine over the rim of her glass. Outside her rented cabin later that night, stars punctured the velvet darkness. The wine had left me warm and loose-limbed, but it wasn't alcohol that made me linger on her porch. "Claire," she said softly, stepping closer. "Why did you really come?" The question hung between us. I could lie. I could retreat to the safety of my constructed life. Instead, I reached for her, my fingers tracing the line of her jaw. Her breath caught. "I couldn't stop thinking about you," I admitted. Her lips met mine beneath the stars, tentative at first, then with growing certainty. Her mouth tasted of wine and possibility. My hands found their way into her hair as the kiss deepened, awakening parts of me I'd forgotten existed. When we finally broke apart, breathless, Lindsay rested her forehead against mine. "Stay," she whispered. That night changed everything. Morning light filtered through unfamiliar curtains. I blinked awake, momentarily disoriented, until I felt the warm body beside me. Lindsay slept peacefully, her red hair spread across the pillow, freckles visible on her bare shoulders above the sheet. Reality crashed back. I'd spent the night with a woman I barely knew, 300 miles from where I should be. My phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand, 17 missed calls. I slipped from bed, grabbing it in my wrinkled clothes before stepping onto the porch. "Where the hell have you been?" My COO's voice crackled with tension. "The SEC is asking questions about the Westridge acquisition. There are irregularities in the filings." "What kind of irregularities?" I kept my voice steady despite the sudden chill. "Discrepancies in the financials, documents with signatures that don't match. Claire, this looks bad. Really bad." My mind raced. The Westridge deal had been my father's last major acquisition before handing me the reins, the foundation of our current market position. "I'll be back today. Have legal prepare everything." When I returned inside, Lindsay was sitting up in bed, sheet pulled around her. The soft vulnerability in her eyes from last night had been replaced by wariness. "Corporate emergency?" she asked, watching me gather my things. "Something I need to handle personally." I hesitated, unsure how to navigate this morning after. "Lindsay, about last night." "It's fine." She cut me off. "You need to go, I get it." "It's not that simple, isn't it?" She stood, wrapping the sheet around herself. "This was fun, Claire. A vacation from real life." Her dismissal stung more than it should have. "That's not fair." "Then explain it to me. Tell me you're not running back to your safe corporate world at the first sign of trouble." I couldn't. Because she was right. The silence stretched between us, until my phone rang again. Lindsay shook her head. "Go," she said. "Your real life is calling." I drove back to Anaheim in a fog, my assistant feeding me details over the speakerphone. By afternoon, I was back in my armor, designer suit, perfect makeup, hair pulled into a severe bun, facing a boardroom of concerned executives and attorneys. "The SEC investigation concerns documentation from the Westridge acquisition," our chief counsel explained. "Signatures on key documents appear forged. Financial statements may have been falsified." "That's impossible," I snapped. "My father personally oversaw that deal." The room fell uncomfortably silent. "Claire," my CFO said gently, "the irregularities date back to your father's tenure. The board is concerned about how deep this goes." My world tilted on its axis. The company my father built, the legacy I'd devoted my life to upholding, might be built on fraud. Days blurred into nights, as we dug through archives and financial records. I moved into my office, sleeping on the couch when I slept at all. The investigation expanded, revealing troubling patterns of financial manipulation dating back decades. My father's business genius now looked more like carefully constructed deception. And through it all, Lindsay's absence felt like a physical ache. I'd check my phone constantly, though I never called her. What would I say? That I'd left her bed to defend a corporate kingdom potentially built on lies? A week into the crisis, my assistant knocked on my office door. "There's something you should see." She handed me a file. From the old archive room, it was misfiled. Inside was a photo I'd never seen. My father standing with another man beside a manufacturing plant. The building behind them bore the Hall Enterprises logo, but the location wasn't one I recognized. I flipped the photo over. Written on the back, Westridge site preparation with Richard Hall and Thomas Montgomery, 1988. Montgomery. The name triggered something in my memory. Hadn't Lindsay mentioned that was her birth mother's last name? Before I could process this, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. "Claire Hall." Claire Lindsay's voice sounded strained. "I found something you should see. I'm in the middle of a crisis. It's about your company, and possibly my birth parents." My heart stopped. "What are you talking about?" "I found a photograph in a town archive. Your mother is in it, standing next to a woman who might be my birth mother." The room seemed to tilt. "When was it taken?" 1988. At some kind of corporate event. The same year as my photo. This couldn't be coincidence. "Lindsay, I need to see it. I'm in Redwood Falls, 2 hours north of..." "I know where it is. I'll be there tomorrow." I hung up, staring at the photograph in my hand, mind racing with impossible connections. What if Lindsay's search for her roots and my company's emerging scandal were somehow linked? What had my father been involved in? As I packed a bag to leave, my COO confronted me in the hallway. "Where are you going?" "We're in crisis mode." "Something I need to handle personally," I said, echoing my words to Lindsay days before. "This company needs you here." I paused, suddenly clear-headed for the first time in days. "Maybe what this company needs is the truth," I replied, walking past him toward the elevator. The board voted to suspend me pending investigation. I learned this via text from my assistant as I drove north toward Lindsay. My entire identity, Claire Hall, ruthless CEO, stripped away with a single message. Strangely, I felt lighter without the weight of expectation. The coastal highway stretched before me, autumn sunlight dancing on the water. For the first time, I didn't check my email at every rest stop. Instead, I thought about Lindsay, the warmth of her smile, the challenging questions she asked that no one else dared to, the way she looked at me like I was more than a business card and balance sheet. I checked into a small hotel in Redwood Falls by late afternoon. When Lindsay opened her door, her expression was guarded. "You actually came." I said I would. An awkward silence fell between us. The intimacy we'd shared seemed like a dream now, replaced by tension and unspoken words. "I have the photograph," she said finally, gesturing me inside. Her temporary apartment was sparse but lived in. Books piled on the coffee table, maps spread across the kitchen counter with locations circled in red marker. Lindsay handed me a large envelope. Inside was a yellowed newspaper clipping with a photograph. My breath caught. There was my mother, Elizabeth Hall, her smile tight and formal. Beside her stood a woman with Lindsay's unmistakable red hair and proud posture. "Rebecca Montgomery," Lindsay said quietly. "My birth mother, according to the records I've found." The caption read, "Elizabeth Hall presents Community Service Award to Rebecca Montgomery, Hall Enterprises Employee of the Year, 1988. She worked for your family's company," Lindsay said. "The newspaper article says she was a senior accountant. The same year as the photograph I'd found. The same year as the Westridge acquisition." "Lindsay, what do you know about Westridge Manufacturing?" "Only what I've pieced together. Rebecca Montgomery worked there before it was acquired by Hall Enterprises. After the acquisition, she disappeared from public record." Lindsay hesitated. "There's more. I found court records showing she tried to file whistleblower complaints about accounting practices before she vanished." My phone buzzed. The CFO again. I silenced it. "My company is under investigation for fraud related to that acquisition," I admitted. "Documentation was falsified." I met her eyes. "I think our pasts might be connected through something my father did." Lindsay's expression hardened. "So this is just business for you after all? Following a paper trail?" "No," I reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Lindsay, I care about you. That hasn't changed." "Hasn't it?" "You left without a word. Now you're back, because I might be useful to your investigation." "That's not true." "Then why are you really here, Claire?" "Because from where I'm standing, I'm just another asset to be acquired or discarded." Her words cut deep because they exposed my greatest fear, that I was incapable of connection beyond transaction, that I was my father's daughter in all the worst ways. "I should go," I said, my voice tight. "Thank you for showing me this." Outside in the crisp fall air, I walked aimlessly, the photograph burning a hole in my pocket. My phone rang again. This time I answered. "What?" I snapped. "Miss Hall?" "It's Elizabeth Clark. I worked as your father's secretary during the Westridge acquisition." I stopped walking. "How did you get this number?" "Your assistant." I told her it was urgent. The elderly woman's voice quavered slightly. "I've been following the news about the investigation. There are things you should know." We arranged to meet at a diner on the edge of town. Elizabeth Clark was in her 70s now, elegantly dressed with perfectly coiffed silver hair. "I've kept silent too long," she said without preamble. "Your father wasn't the man you think he was." She told me a story that unraveled everything I thought I knew. How my father had falsified environmental reports during the Westridge acquisition. How he'd silenced whistleblowers, including Rebecca Montgomery. "There was an accident," Elizabeth said, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. "A chemical spill that was covered up. People died. I felt sick." "Was Rebecca Montgomery one of them?" Elizabeth nodded slowly. "She and her husband both. They'd threatened to go public. They had a daughter, I said numbly. What happened to her? Your father arranged private adoptions for children orphaned by the incident. To minimize liability, she looked at me with sad eyes. Including you, Claire. The world stopped. What? Your parents worked at Westridge too. They died in the same accident. Richard and Elizabeth Hall weren't your biological parents. They adopted you to maintain appearances after they couldn't have children of their own. I stumbled from the diner, gasping for air. The foundation of my existence, the family legacy I'd killed myself to uphold, was built on death and deception. My feet carried me back to Lindsay's apartment. I knocked, not caring that tears streamed down my face. When she opened the door, her anger faded at the sight of me. Claire, what happened? Everything I thought I knew about myself is a lie. Lindsay guided me inside, her earlier anger forgotten. I collapsed onto her couch, shaking. Tell me, she said softly, sitting beside me. The words tumbled out. Elizabeth Clark's revelations, my father's crimes, the truth of my adoption. With each sentence, the carefully constructed narrative of my life unraveled further. I'm not even Claire Hall, I whispered. I don't know who I am. Lindsay's hand found mine, warm and steady. You're still you, the person I've come to know these past weeks? A person built on lies. No. Her voice was firm. The company might be built on lies, but you're more than your last name. We talked through the night. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I need to know who I really am. There must be records somewhere. Lindsay nodded. We'll search together. For the first time in my professional life, I ignored my responsibilities completely. Board calls went unanswered. Emails piled up unread. Instead, I immersed myself in the search for truth alongside Lindsay. We started with Hall Enterprises archives. Using my still active security credentials, I remotely accessed digitized records from the 1980s. Most files related to the Westridge acquisition had been purged, but scattered references remained. Look at this. Lindsay pointed to a financial report. There's a recurring payment to something called Project Rebirth. I scrolled through more documents. It shows up in several records, but there's no explanation of what it was. We expanded our search to public records. Lindsay, with her researcher's instinct, suggested we look for unusual adoption patterns around the time of the Westridge acquisition. There, she said, pointing to her laptop screen. 5 closed adoptions processed by the same attorney within 3 months after the acquisition date. The attorney's name was familiar. He'd been on the Hall Enterprises board until his death 10 years ago. We need to find those adoption records, I said. They'll be sealed. Not to the adopted children themselves. I made calls, leveraging the Hall name while I still could. Within days, I had an appointment at the county records office. The clerk was sympathetic but firm. Even with court approval, this will take time. I slid a check across the desk, for the expedite fee. 3 days later, I received a sealed envelope. Lindsay and I sat in her apartment, staring at it. Open it, she urged gently. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was my original birth certificate. Mother, Catherine Winters. Father, James Winters. Both employees at Westridge Manufacturing. Catherine and James, I whispered, finally having names for the faces I couldn't remember. They died when I was 4. Lindsay squeezed my hand. At least now you know. There was more. Medical records, photos, even a letter my mother had written to me that had somehow been included in the adoption file. My dearest Claire, it began. If you're reading this, something has happened to your father and me. Know that you were loved beyond measure. Tears blurred my vision as I read her words. A mother I couldn't remember, speaking to me across decades. That night, I dreamed of a woman with my eyes and a gentle smile. She sang to me, a tune I almost recognized upon waking. The next morning, an email arrived from the records clerk. They'd found more information. Lindsay and I returned to the county office. We located records for all 5 children adopted after the Westridge incident, the clerk explained, handing me a folder. Legal said I could share the names since you're technically one of them. I scanned the list. My birth name, Claire Winters, was there. So was Lindsay Montgomery. Lindsay, I whispered, pushing the paper toward her. Look. She stared at her name, her face pale. We were both from Westridge families. But we're not related, I confirmed, relief washing through me. Different parents. We spent the next days piecing together what had happened. A toxic chemical release at Westridge had been covered up during the acquisition. Our parents, along with 3 other employees, had died. The Hull Corporation had arranged quiet adoptions for the orphaned children to minimize scandal and liability. The Hulls knew, Lindsay said quietly as we sat with our findings. They knew exactly where you came from, let you believe you were their child, then made you dedicate your life to the company that killed your real parents. The betrayal cut deep. I'd spent my entire life trying to please people who had orchestrated the greatest deception imaginable. As night fell, Lindsay found me standing at her apartment window, staring at nothing. "What will you do now?" she asked. I turned to her, suddenly certain. "Expose everything. The fraud, the cover-up, the deaths, whatever it costs. You'll lose the company. It was never truly mine to begin with." I tracked Lindsay to a small coastal town 3 days after she disappeared. She'd left suddenly, saying she needed space to process everything we'd discovered. The silence between us had been unbearable. Each unanswered text a fresh wound. The town was postcard perfect, whitewashed buildings along a rocky shore, fishing boats bobbing in the harbor. I found her exactly where the motel clerk said she might be, standing at the edge of a cliff overlooking the churning ocean below. "Planning to jump?" I called, trying for lightness despite my racing heart. She turned, unsurprised. "How did you find me?" "I run a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Or I did." I moved beside her at the railing. "Finding one schoolteacher isn't exactly challenging." The wind whipped her red hair across her face. She looked beautiful and broken and fierce all at once. "I needed to think," she said. "Everything's connected in ways I never imagined." "Lindsay, listen to me." I reached for her hands. "We're not related." I double-checked all the records. Our parents worked together, died in the same corporate cover-up, but were not connected by blood. Relief flickered across her face, followed by something more complex. "That's not why I left." "Then why?" She gazed out at the horizon. "Because I'm falling in love with you, and I'm terrified of what happens next." The words hung between us, carried on salt air. "You're rebuilding your entire life," she continued, "discovering who you really are. I don't want to be just part of that crisis, something you'll outgrow once you've settled into your new reality." I stepped closer. "Is that what you think? That my feelings for you are some product of trauma?" "Aren't they? The powerful CEO has her world shattered, finds comfort with the simple school teacher." She shook her head. "I've read that story before. It doesn't end well for the school teacher." "That's not our story." I cupped her face in my hands. "Lindsay, meeting you wasn't just coincidence. It was the universe forcing me to confront the emptiness I'd been running from my entire life." Her eyes searched mine. "And when this is over, when you've confronted your past and rebuilt your life, will there still be room for me? You are the life I want to build." The ocean crashed below as I kissed her, not the hesitant exploration of our first night together, but a promise. Her arms wrapped around me, pulling me closer as wind whipped around us. Later, in her motel room, I showed her the evidence I'd gathered. Email trails, financial records, internal memos. Enough to expose decades of corporate malfeasance. "I'm going public tomorrow," I said. "The Hall legacy ends here." Lindsay's fingers traced patterns on the back of my hand. "What will happen to you?" "Legally? My lawyers think I'm insulated since I wasn't involved in the original cover-up. Professionally?" I shrugged. "I'll be toxic in the business world." "And if you just walk away? Let the past stay buried?" I shook my head. 5 families lost parents. Environments were poisoned. Lives destroyed. I can't walk away from that. Lindsay kissed me softly. "It's one of the reasons I love you. Your steel spine." That night, we made love with a desperate intensity, clinging to each other as if the world might tear us apart at any moment. Her hands mapped my body, claiming territory with gentle determination. When she whispered, "I love you," against my skin, I felt something inside me break open. Walls I'd built over a lifetime crumbling in an instant. Morning found us tangled in sheets, planning our next steps. I would return to Anaheim to deliver the evidence to authorities and face the board. Lindsay would continue piecing together the stories of the other affected families. "I want to meet them," I said. "The other 3 children who were adopted after the incident." "We'll find them together," Lindsay promised, "after this is over." The drive back to Anaheim was both an ending and a beginning. Lindsay followed in her Jeep, remaining connected through calls at every rest stop. For the first time in my life, I wasn't facing a crisis alone. The Hall Enterprises tower gleamed in the late afternoon sun when we arrived. Security guards looked uncertain whether to treat me as CEO or intruder. I still had my access card. No one had thought to deactivate it. "Wait for me," I told Lindsay in the parking garage. "This won't take long." "I'm coming with you." "Lindsay, we do this together." Her eyes held mine. "That's how it works from now on." Hand in hand, we rode the elevator to the executive floor. The board was in emergency session, perfect timing. Without knocking, I pushed open the boardroom doors. 12 faces turned toward me in shock. My former mentors, colleagues, people who'd respected and feared me in equal measure. "Claire." The chairman recovered first. "This is a closed meeting." I placed a flash drive on the polished table. Everything's on there. The Westridge cover-up, the deaths, the adoptions. My voice remained steady, including mine. 6 months changes everything and nothing. The headlines had faded. Hall Enterprises CEO exposes decades of corporate crime. Whistleblower heiress renounces fortune. Justice for Westridge victims after 30 years. The lawsuits continued, but I'd stepped away from the spotlight. My penthouse was gone, sold to fund the foundation I'd established for environmental remediation in communities affected by Hall Enterprises negligence. I'd kept only my mother's letter and a few photographs of my true parents that we'd managed to uncover. The cottage I now called home sat on a bluff overlooking the ocean, modest by my former standards but perfect for my new life. Lindsay's books filled the shelves, her teaching materials scattered across the dining table. I poured coffee into 2 mugs, carrying them to the deck where Lindsay sat wrapped in a blanket against the morning chill. "Working already?" I asked, noting the papers in her lap. She smiled up at me, the same smile that had first cracked my carefully constructed walls months ago. "Just reviewing the grant applications for the Victims Fund." We'd found all 5 families affected by the Westridge incident, 5 children, now adults, whose lives had been irrevocably altered by corporate greed. Together, we'd created a foundation using a portion of what remained of my inheritance, focusing on environmental justice. "The Washington Post called again," Lindsay said, taking her coffee. "They want an exclusive on the 1-year anniversary of the exposé. Let them talk to the lawyers." I sat beside her, our shoulders touching. "I'm done being Claire Hall, corporate celebrity." Lindsay's hand found mine, our fingers intertwining with practiced ease. "No regrets?" I looked out at the horizon where sea met sky. "About bringing down the company? None. About waiting 38 years to find out who I really am?" I squeezed her hand. "Maybe some." The transition hadn't been easy. I'd spent weeks testifying before grand juries and regulatory agencies. The Hall name, never truly mine, had been dragged through public disgrace. Former colleagues avoided me. Business publications that once celebrated my acumen now dissected my downfall. But there had been unexpected joys too. Discovering my talent for restructuring struggling environmental nonprofits. Finding purpose in helping other adoptees search for their histories. Waking each morning beside Lindsay, learning the rhythm of shared domesticity. "The community center called," Lindsay said. "They want you to speak at their fundraiser next month." I groaned. "Why me? I'm the corporate villain who got away." "Because you're also the woman who sacrificed everything to expose the truth." Lindsay turned to face me fully, the woman who chose justice over power. The woman I fall more in love with every day. Her words still had the power to undo me. 6 months together, and I remained in constant wonder that someone like Lindsay, transparent, principled, wholly authentic, could love someone like me, still learning how to be human after decades of corporate armor. "Come with me," I said suddenly, standing and pulling her to her feet. "Where?" "You'll see." We walked along the cliff path until we reached the small cove below our cottage. The morning tide had receded, leaving wet sand that caught the sunlight like scattered diamonds. "This is where I was standing when I realized," I said. "Realized what?" "That I was finally home." I turned to face her. "Not the place. You—" The salt breeze caught Lindsay's hair, lifting copper strands across her freckled face. She looked exactly as she had that first day on the highway, brilliantly alive, unapologetically herself. I reached into my pocket, fingers closing around the small object I'd carried for weeks, waiting for the right moment. I spent my whole life chasing approval from people who never really saw me, I said, trying to earn love that was never freely given. Lindsay's eyes widened as I opened my palm, revealing a simple ring, a band of twisted silver holding a small piece of sea glass. I made it, I admitted. Took a class in town. I'm better at corporate takeovers than metalwork, but... It's perfect, she whispered. I took her hand. I don't have a legacy to offer anymore. No empire, no fortune, no power. Just me, still figuring out who Claire Winters really is. Tears glistened in Lindsay's eyes. That's all I've ever wanted. Marry me? I asked, my voice catching. Be my family, the real kind, built on truth? Her answer was a kiss that tasted of coffee and certainty and future, her arms pulling me close against the endless horizon of sea and sky. When we finally broke apart, both laughing and crying, she held out her hand. Yes, she said simply, as I slid the ring onto her finger. The ocean stretched before us, vast and full of possibility. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking backward at a legacy built on lies or forward to the next acquisition. I was simply here, present in this perfect moment with the woman who had taught me that the truest form of success wasn't measured in stock prices or corner offices. It was measured in the courage to begin again, in the strength to face truth, however painful, and in the joy of finding someone to walk beside you as you discover who you were always meant to be.